Welcome to lesson 14 of quick and effective environment illustration. Now we're approaching the home stretch where we're really rendering out the foreground. You know, we can treat the foreground a little differently than we treat the background, where in the background, all the color and texture and any detail is really brought about just through the edges of the layer shape and texture brushes, large texture brushes, and carving out and pulling back into that color. Where here in the foreground, you know, I can paint in a branch, I can paint in a twig, I can paint in shrubbery, you know, actually use the brush stroke and almost start to draw with the paint and think about the light sides and shadow sides and applying form lighting in a more rendered approach. You know, if you just glance from the foreground to the background, from the foreground back, and especially if you squint, you can see how soft, how low contrast that background is compared to this foreground. You know, and that's a matter of how much detail we can see. And try to play that up. Not overwork it, but play it up to really show that the depth of where we are in this scene, in this landscape. So I'm still using a similar approach as I have been of laying down a shape, carving it out if it's not right, you know, adding to it if it is right. And here now that we're in more of a rendering stage in the foreground, I can also be freer with my layers because I'm no longer building the foundation for future work. This really is the future work that all that foundation has been laid for. You know, it's been built so that we can now freely work and not worry about staying so organized. We got all the hard stuff and the restraint out of the way, and now at the end we can feel free to express yourself a lot more. But don't get carried away with things. You know, remember that the initial sketch and where this image is going. But if there's any stage in the process where you can loosen up and kind of let the work take you and just spend the time rendering and refining, this is the time to. This is the rendering stage. This is you know, the final painting where we're really starting to bring it to life now. I'm still saving the lights for the end. And it's really similar to how you would do this traditionally. You know, if this was oil or acrylic, you take it one step at a time, you block it in. See, and traditionally you've got to keep blocking in every time you're putting down a color. You know, you can't just lay down that mass of the middle ground and then change the color of it. You know, you've got to rework those edges every time you paint. And that's why using Photoshop to do this work is so nice, because you lock out that shape, you lock the layer, and you can make adjustments all day and all night, and you're never going to ruin the initial drawing, the foundation. So here I'm being loose and free, and I'm putting down dark shadow, and I'm going to react to it and see, you know, is this the dark shadow of some shrubbery that's coming up? Is this the dark shadow of dead branches or roots, or the shadow under a rock? And none of this stuff is really thought out beyond what's on the page, and keeping in mind the overall image, trying to create something interesting down here that pulls you up into the picture And like much of the work so far is slowly building it up. So here I'm painting with black. It's technically not 000, but you can't tell the difference between this and black on most monitors. And certainly once it's in print, you can't. This is a dark enough color that it's black. And so that's as dark as it goes. And see those objects are right in the foreground. As close to you as anything is in the image would be these rocks, these branches coming up of some ground shrubbery in the foreground, and these dark shadows. And that's when you use the darks, the darks. You know, nothing that dark further back in space. And by following that rule, you know, that's one of those rules that you follow that and get that in your picture, and it starts to give depth and give the perspective that you're trying to create. Now I'm just sketching up some more branches down in the corner, and I'm trying to basically diffuse this corner so that it becomes the corner of the image. It's a dark area. There's still overlap of this ridge versus those trees, but I'm not trying to draw any attention to it. You know, the way that main tree overlaps the mountains in the background, that's the focal point. I want to draw attention to that. The way these trees and this broken trunk overlaps these further pine trees, I don't want to draw attention to it. I want to get it in the image so that it reads, so that it's there. But I don't want you to look at that instead of looking at the focal point. And that's why we keep it dark, and we don't start turning the form too much, and we don't add lights, and we don't add the full range of what you could see in there. Because in this image, we're drawing from the focal point. So if our eyes are up there looking at that mountain, down here in this corner, this is peripheral, in the shadow, and if you're really standing in a scene like this, you would see very little down there. And as an exercise, next time you're out in a scene like this, look down into that shadow, and then the whole world will open up, and you'll see how much detail is there in that rock, in that shrub, in that corner. And then if you go from there and look back at your focal point, especially if you're going from light to dark, you know, you'll see how you can't really live in both places at once. You can't see the detail in the corner and the shadow the same as when you're seeing the detail in the focal point. Of course, you can with some 4,000 pixel cameras and things like that. You can see 100% detail, 100% everywhere. But that's not what a landscape environment painting is about. A landscape environment painting is about creating this landscape so that you could imagine yourself there, so that it's giving the impression of what it's like to really be there, not what it's like to take a digital photo of the place. That's what this technique is about. That's what traditionally landscape painting is about. It's about the impression of being in this place that as a viewer you're not currently in. And the old masters get that impression across so strongly without the detail, without the 100% high-res detail all across the image. And so I'm going to finish up rendering out this area, refining up any details we can throw in here in the foreground. And the next lesson, we're going to switch it up and move way into the background, and we're going to work on those clouds. We're going to blur out those clouds and bring them up to the finished level. So I'll see you there in the next lesson, and we're getting real close to wrapping up this image.